Good evening and welcome to Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Gene Preuss with the League of Women Voters of the Houston area, and welcome to our November the 7th show. It is the 7th, right? I feel a little unprepared today. I'm not wearing a jacket, but it's because we're going to get down to business and we're going to work really hard tonight. A lot of things have been happening that we're going to talk about tonight. I want to introduce my guests. On my left here is Dr. Christina Hughes from the University of Houston Downtown, a political science professor. Next to her is Dr. William V. Flores, also of the University of Houston Downtown, also a political science professor, but we're not going to just talk about politics tonight. And finally, we have Taya Youngs, a UHD honors student, and she's going to talk about something else very important to the League of Women Voters tonight. And so we have a show where we have a lot to talk about. We just finished our election, so we're going to talk a little bit about our election. And so the big things we're going to talk about tonight, community civic engagement. What does that mean? That's a big word. Civic engagement, community engagement, volunteering is part of that. And it's something that we're interested in with the League of Women Voters. We're a volunteer organization, and people talk about volunteerism and talk about civic engagement as if they're very separate things. Dr. Flores, I think you're going to shed some light on that. We're going to talk about the elections and the election results. You may remember that here on the League of Women Voters, with our conversations with the candidates, I think we had 16 shows where we interviewed the various candidates for all the different elections, for Houston mayor, Houston controller, and then all of the seats and at-large positions. So we spent a lot of time interviewing 88 candidates. And then plus District 148, Texas House District 148, I think we had 11 candidates from there. We interviewed them. So we've been very busy, and Taya was at almost every one of those. So she's been very involved and helpful in volunteering. So you're enrolled in a new, not a new program, but in the start of a program that the League of Women Voters is doing called Rising Stars, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But first of all, I do want to talk about civic engagement. Dr. Flores has a book, and you can hold that up and show everybody. What's the title of it?
Well, this book is Democracy, and it says Democracy, Civic Engagement, and Citizenship in Higher Education. And part of it came out of Points of Light, which is a national organization for volunteerism and community engagement, and from the Kettering Foundation. Those are two sponsors. We brought together people from higher education, essentially, to talk about how do we get back to our civic purpose, and what is that civic purpose. So democracy, it can only function if there is an engaged citizenry, an educated and engaged citizenry. In fact, Jefferson said that was the heart of what a democracy is. And they looked at education as fundamental to having an engaged citizenship. So what we want to do is get back to that root. Too often when people talk about higher education, they only talk about, are we preparing people for jobs in the workforce? And what we're saying is we want to do that, but we really want to give them the skill set so they can be leaders of our society, so they can be the leaders of our democracy, and so they can understand how to play an engaged role and be committed to that for the rest of their lives.
I think that's fantastic. I know you worked long and hard on that book. And how many authors, how many chapters are in there?
There's 25 authors, 20 presidents of colleges and universities throughout the country, and then 5 Senate directors. And then in addition, one foundation director, and and Neil Bush, who wrote the foreword. Neil Bush is the head of the board for Points of Light, and he continues with his father's effort, which founded, George H.W. Bush founded Points of Light as a way of recognizing and honoring volunteerism. And one of the things that we decided to do, when I was president at the University of Houston downtown, we were asked during the time that Points of Light had its conference here in Houston if we would be part of the host committee. And my wife and I, who's one of the authors, Noelle Bizet-Flores, we were asked if we would be co-hosts and lead an education panel. And it became two total tracks, one in education and one in higher education. And since that time, we've been involved with Points of Light. And in fact, both my wife and I were honored to be selected as Points of Light, and honored by George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. The point is that through that experience, we saw that, campuses really weren't engaged with that process. Very few higher education institutions were involved with Points of Light. Meanwhile, on UHT is a very fortunate campus because it's right in the heart of a city. It's got an engaged faculty, an engaged student body, but also it has a center for public deliberation. And the Kettering Foundation sponsors organizations and universities to take up very difficult questions and to have dialogues with the community on these issues. And so I became active in the Kettering Foundation and its President's Council. And through that participation, we decided, let's do a book. And so that's where this came about.
Sorry about that, excuse me. Speaking of, I want to go to a clip that we have. You were talking about the Points of Light Foundation. Mm-hmm. Let me read from the introduction, the foreword to the book by Neil Bush. Nearly 30 years ago, my dad evoked the image of 1,000 points of light. He observed that for every problem there were solutions playing out in communities across America led by the thousands of nonprofit organizations powered by millions of volunteers. He acknowledged that there is a critical role for government in finding solutions, but that government does not always have the answers, making civic engagement even more important. And so what I'd like to do right now is play from the 1988 Republican National Convention nominating speech, George W. Bush's, H.W. Bush's, where he first mentions publicly that 1,000 points of light, a clip from that speech.
Wonderful.
If so, we can go to that.
An election that's about ideas and values is also about philosophy. And I have one. At the bright center is the individual. And radiating out from him or her is the family, the essential unit of closeness and of love. For it's the family that communicates to our children, to the 21st century, our culture, our religious faith, our traditions and history. From the individual to the family to the community and then on out to the town, the church and the school, and still echoing out to the county, the state, and the nation, each doing only what it does well and no more. And I believe that power must always be kept close to the individual, close to the hands that raise the family and run the home. guided by certain traditions. One is that there's a God and He is good, and His love, while free, has a self-imposed cost. We must be good to one another. I believe in another tradition that is by now embedded in the national soul. It's that learning is good in and of itself. You know, the mothers of the Jewish ghettos of the East would pour honey on a book so the children would know that learning is sweet. And the parents who settled hungry Kansas would take their children in from the fields when a teacher came. That is our history. And there's another tradition, and that's the idea of community, a beautiful word with a big meaning. Though liberal Democrats have an odd view of it, they see community as a limited cluster of interest groups locked in odd conformity. And in this view, the country waits passive while Washington sets the rules. But that's not what community means, not to me. For we're a nation of community, of thousands and tens of thousands of ethnic, religious, social, business, labor union, neighborhood, regional, and other organizations, all of them varied, voluntary, and unique. This is America, the Knights of Columbus, the Grange, Hadassah, the Disabled American Veterans, the Order of AHEPA, the Business and Professional Women of America, the Union Hall, the Bible Study Group, LULAC, Holy Name. A brilliant diversity spread like stars, like 1,000 points of light in a broad and peaceful sky. Does government have a place? Yes. Government is part of the nation of communities, not the whole, just a part. And I don't hate government. A government that remembers that the people are its master is a good and needed thing. And I respect old-fashioned common sense.
It's that was a long time ago. It seems like, right?
He was a young guy.
Very young, yeah. I wanted to remind everyone that we do have phone lines, and if you'd like to call in and ask questions of any of our guests tonight, our phone number is 713-807-1974. That's 713-807-1974. So let me get back, Bill, and talk to you about the book. And so this idea of volunteerism, that and one of the things that Bush did was really promote this idea and bring it to the national light. I think people have been volunteering a lot, but this idea that volunteerism was at the heart of the as us as a people and part of our role as citizens was something that really hadn't been talked about very much, I don't believe. And what you did, and one of the things that I know that you were interested in, was how do you bring this to universities? Now, and Taya, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things we found out was that more and more students coming out of high school had been imbued with a sense of volunteerism, as that the high schools had been promoting students to get involved in different organizations. And we see in our college and universities a lot of student organizations, a lot of students involved in their communities, concerned about the communities, more so than when I was a child, when I was a student coming out of high school. I did some volunteer work, but I can't say that it was really pushed or encouraged by the schools. But is this the case now that schools are doing this more?
I can say in high school I didn't see it as much, but me being in college, definitely. I hold many leadership positions on campus, and we have meetings every month, and each organization has, we're volunteering here, come sign up with us, we're volunteering here, come sign up this, and we try to collaborate on different volunteer opportunities. So I can definitely say, like, we volunteer a lot as college students, and we see the effect that it has.
Do you think that takes up a lot of your time, though?
It can, but when you do it for a reason, it makes up for it, because you know that you're helping people. You see behind the scenes what's going on. You see that, yeah, people can get paid to do certain stuff, but it's not getting done. So you go and do it. It makes you feel empowered, because you're stepping up and you're doing what other people are not doing.
So Bill, do you see that? Why do you think that this was so important for colleges? Why hadn't that really been focused on very much before?
Well, part of the thing, and this isn't just volunteerism, it's how do you get people engaged in our democracy? Part of it is addressing problems in your neighborhood. And what we want to do is get students to do that. 40% of high school students volunteer. 60% of those that go on to college in high school volunteer. Only 25% of college students volunteer. So 40%, 60%, 25%. Part of it is that's often required in high school, or maybe it's going to help them get a scholarship or get admitted. But when they get in, maybe they work. Maybe they've got other kinds of demands, a lot of homework. And so how do you navigate that? What we want is for the universities to play a conscious role, not only encouraging volunteerism, having service learning courses, internships, but also generating discussion and dialogue about how to solve problems and giving students the skill sets to do so. We've seen national studies that show that those people that do volunteer and that continue that engagement through their college are more likely to be engaged for the rest of their life. But also they're more prepared for employment. They're more prepared for when those jobs disappear, keeping employment. During the recession, students college graduates that had volunteered were twice as likely to keep a job or find a new one than those who hadn't. So it wasn't just that they had a college degree, it was they had a college degree and had gained some skills by problem solving, thinking creatively on how to do that. And so as colleges and universities, we want to give them those skills, but give them life skills that they can take and apply anywhere. And that they can then apply to make this a strong democracy as well.
Tina, let me ask you a question. You teach political science, and I know that a lot of your students are involved in community engagement. Is this the traditional thing that faculty and professors at universities think about community engagement or civic engagement?
I don't think so. When the first time I required my students to do a service learning project was when I was teaching at U of H, and I remember I had to jump through so many loopholes. Like I had to give them a contract. They had to have an out because the university was so afraid of having this requirement on the students, right? At UHD, because it's built in, that it's like really easy to do. But I think all it takes is, because after I offered my first class at UH main campus where I required a service learning, then I noticed other professors were also starting to require it. So I think all it takes is like either having the support of the university saying this is something we want you to do, or just having one professor say, oh, we want you to do this. But and then I would have, so like I used to have my students volunteer for a political campaign. And so I had a student who had volunteered for a political campaign to get his to get credit for the course. Then the candidate that he had volunteered for got elected to office, and then he became chief of staff for this candidate. So then I would have him come back and like talk to my students about, yeah, I did this 5 hours of volunteer work to get an A, and now I have a job and a career because of that. To kind of show them that link that, it actually turns into something.
I always think it's interesting when former students, end up running for office, and I've seen several of those. That happens several times. It's some of our students later on go off. In fact, Briscoe Kane right now, sitting in the Texas House, is a UHD student, one of David Branham's students. And we've had others who have run as well and participated. The late Mario Gallegos was a UHD alumni, and so it's
Ed Gonzalez,
Ed Gonzalez,
the sheriff
right?
of Harris County,
right, and he's always so affable, and comes on campus and visits with us, and we appreciate that. So let me ask you, Bill. I know that you've got some suggestions in the book of what faculty or college presidents, really you're talking to college presidents, how to get them involved and how to create that. You've had a long trail of experience yourself. Tell us a little bit about Bill Flores and where he's from and what your experiences have been in the past.
Well, that's that's a lot.
And we've only got a few minutes.
Yeah,
So, I
but
mean,
I just to say that part of this, one of the, being first generation,
Right.
and a lot of us are first generation in college. I had to work to go to college. I had to figure out ways to survive to do that. But I also grew up in a time in the late '60s where activism was all over the campus, all over the country, in demonstrations against the Vietnam War, civil rights struggles, etc. And when I was at UCLA, I met through my aunt, who was editor of a newspaper, Senator Chavez, and became a volunteer for the United Farm Workers. And so that was an activism that changed my life. And not just that participation, but learning from a farm worker who was the head of the committee and that barely spoke any English, learning organizational skills and realizing it's not whether you have a PhD, it's what you have in your heart and the interest that you have. And I've taken that lesson with me wherever I go and whatever position I've held, that you want to learn from others and not assume that because you have the PhD that you're the expert. But more importantly, it's the people like that like my parents. When I was 14, my mom and my dad got involved in an issue for anti-discrimination in fair housing, and I modeled that behavior. I saw that. I joined with them in getting petitions signed. Those things sort of guided me for the rest of my life.
and so I think that's important, right? Is that you're bringing in life experiences too, and it's kind of like everything led you to where you are here. I read your chapter in the book, and you spent a lot of time talking about your family and what it meant being a first generation college student yourself. But then you've gone on to be, provost and professor, of course, and had leadership positions. And in fact, I'm reminded by our former League of Women Voters of the Houston area President Linda Cohen that you were the speaker at the 2013 annual meeting, and so you've been around and been involved, and I know that you've always been very interested in getting students to get out and vote, to get out and participate. And when you were president, that was one of your big pushes. November is Citizenship Month, and unfortunately, we weren't able to get anybody from Citizenship Month. They all had other obligations tonight, and now with it's raining, I hope everybody's okay. But tell us a little bit about Citizenship Month here in Houston.
Well, not to take too much time, but just the idea that, and this is very much involved in the book, the idea that we as citizens can solve problems and make our community better, and encourage people to do this 365 days of the year in any way to make Houston a better place. And so Citizenship Month was sponsored by the mayor, brought public agencies together, community organizations, art groups, volunteer organizations, hundreds of organizations all over Houston, engaged for that whole month to make this a better place and to bring people's awareness about the great opportunities that we have in every part of Houston, and that you can participate in to whether it's to plant trees, to clean up the bayou, to paint over graffiti, things that you can do to get involved, to make your neighborhood and our city a better place to live. And I'm very proud that UHD, when I was president, was very engaged with that and led that effort.
One of the things that we often talk about, and why it's called Citizenship Month, what does it mean to you, Taya, to be a citizen?
To me, what it means to be a citizen, I would say that it means that you belong and you care about a specific community. And what the reason I say that you care is because you have to you have to help in the community. It's not about just being there or something like that. It's about actually being involved and contributing to your community. I would say that's what I believe citizenship is.
I think that it's a concept that we talk a lot about, but what does it really mean? We don't always know. It's a word that we throw around.
So-
Tina, what do you?
Well,
what do you teach?
Aristotle said that a citizen is one who has the right to participate. So there's an assumption that a citizen participates in the system. So if you don't ever participate, then are you a citizen? Aristotle might say no, right? You have to participate as long as you have that right, because that's what citizenship is. It's not just watching TV and complaining, it's actually participating in voting or getting out in your community, painting over graffiti, making it better. There's an obligation to citizenship. We always talk about the rights that U.S. citizens have, but we never talk about the obligations. And getting back to Jefferson, when he first proposed that we have a public school system, because we only had private schools, he says we need public schools because in a democracy, you have to have a common education system that teaches people the obligations of citizenship and what that means. And we were talking about how it's going down, and I think you can blame that on the public education system, not higher education system, but elementary, secondary education. We don't even teach civics anymore. Civics used to be a core part. You got civics every year, right? And now you get 1 semester of government, I think, in high school, and 1 semester of economics. And one of the arguments I always make is the reason there's so much cynicism about our government and there's such low trust of our government is because there's so little understanding of how our government is supposed to work and actually works, right? So people get upset because Congress doesn't do anything. Well, it doesn't do anything because by design, it's not supposed to do anything. That's how it's supposed to work. You may not like it, but it's actually working the way it's supposed to. It's not supposed to do anything quickly. Everything's supposed to be done slowly, right? But people get frustrated because they don't understand. I make jokes all the time. I bet you half the members of Congress could not pass one of our government exams.
It's because you guys are tough.
No, it's because I think half the members of Congress have never bothered to actually read the Constitution or the Federalist Papers or the Anti-Federalist Papers or any of the founding documents.
But they swear to uphold it.
It's only 7,000 words. There's no excuse for not reading it. It's 7,250 words.
Oh my
I
God.
carry a copy of it in a purse.
There's a slide up that talks about how the trust level in this country is only 19%
Right.
in government. And what really is interesting is the fact that we've gone from a point where the United States was the leading example in the world for democracy to the most recent ranking where we are now 25th in the world in democracy. And we're going to fall further because of issues that are going on in the country right now. But if you think we're 25th, we're just below Chile and Estonia and just above Cape Verde. That shows you how far we have fallen. And it shows you why we've really got to get back on getting this democracy functioning again.
Okay, so you both brought up issues, education, and
There it
how
is.
far down we are. Now look, folks, we just had an election. Millions of Houstonians went to the polls this week in Harris County and around the state. I
Did
shouldn't
they?
say just
Were there
us.
millions in these? What was the voter
Well,
turnout in Harris
there was,
County?
Only 12%.
Yeah,
That's
I
actually
mean,
high for a mayor election. 12% is actually high. I think the last one was 8.
well, I've got all the numbers right here from the Secretary of State. It wasn't high. It wasn't high. So
Was it higher
look,
than the last election?
It was. I think it was 15% in the county. If I'm looking at the numbers correctly. Actually, I can't see them right here because I kind of cut them off. But I mean, it goes up and down, right? People
it was
vote
12% for the state.
12% for the state. There you go.
12% for the state is high. Usually in a special election, the state, it's below 10%.
Okay, but look, if Aristotle said, and the idea of being a citizen meant was that you did participate, in our history, we have not always allowed people to vote. At first, it was white males, property owners, wealthy. Then we began democratizing, and by that means we got rid of that restriction, but it was still white males. And then we fought a war, and then after that war, we allowed African American males to vote. Then later on, we allowed women to vote. Then we allowed Native Americans to vote. So we have been kind of doling out slowly citizenship and rights and that privilege. I think everybody just thinks, students always think, oh, well, everybody can vote, everybody can vote. It's like it hasn't always been that way.
Well, and we still not everybody can vote.
And everybody, so right, but more people can't. I was surprised that we didn't allow servicemen to vote.
Yeah, we do. Who
Well,
told you that?
we do now, but we used to not.
Oh.
We used to not. If you were in the military, you couldn't vote, especially if you were deployed. You couldn't vote from abroad.
Absentee.
So this
By
idea
the
of
way,
voting.
I would just say one thing, though, is we didn't allow them to vote.
Right.
People fought for the right to vote.
Absolutely.
Whether it was African Americans, whether it was women, whether it was gays and lesbians, every movement for social change has had to remake democracy.
Right. So
And we have to claim it.
I always chastise my students. I say, who voted? And
I
someone raised their hand.
chastised today because I said that in my honors class and not one person raised their hand. And have you seen that graphic? The Electoral College map, what it would look like if millennials and generation, is it Z now?
Z, yeah.
Voted in the same proportion as baby boomers, the entire Electoral College map would be blue.
Why
They could
do
decide the outcome of every
we
election.
not take advantage of our duty as citizens? Why do we not take advantage of the right that a lot of people died for? Why do we ignore that? Why, Taya?
I would say it goes back to what you said about people being uneducated about it. They don't know how the government works and things like that. So you hear people say, and especially I heard people say it a lot, oh, my vote doesn't matter. This and that. It doesn't matter. And they say that all the time, and it's like if everyone would go out and vote, you would see that it does matter. I voted. I early voted, matter of fact. I wanted to get it out the way.
Very good.
But people just don't understand the importance of it. If you don't participate, if you don't do it, how would you know if it really matters?
It's funny you say that. When I was a freshman, I asked that same question, what difference does it make? What difference does it make? And my history professor, a man, Ken Winkle, he's at Nebraska now, he opened up the back of the book and he said, see this number? This says how many people voted in that presidential election. He goes, by not voting, that number changes. And I mean, okay, it's a small thing, but to me, I was like, it made total sense, is that we decide, and we're only letting 12% of people in Texas decide.
2 years ago, in the last election in Virginia, which party controlled the legislature was decided by drawing a name out of a hat.
Right.
Why? Because it was tied. That is actually an example of where one more vote would have not only decided who won the election, but would have decided who controlled the legislature. One vote would have changed the outcome of that election.
And that happens here in Houston all the time. With school board elections, it's happened with the state legislature on several cases where we had one of our alumni from UHD, Mary Perez, who, Mary Ann Perez, she won by 6 votes. It could just as easily have been her opponent had other people shown up, or 6 people not shown up.
Right.
The same thing, actually, in a very close election, another person very good who had served on a school board lost re-election by just a few votes. So this happens all the time. Those couple people make a huge difference.
And ironically, voter turnout is highest in the elections where your vote will count the least. So voter turnout is the highest in a presidential election where your vote counts the least, right? Because there's so many more votes. And voter turnout is lowest in your local elections where your vote's going to count the most because there are fewer people voting.
Well, thank you for that discouraging word. I mean, that's kind
I'm
of
trying to get you to vote in local elections.
So look at this. This is from last year's. This is a report from the Pew Trust, right? A research organization. Texas is in the dumps when it comes to voter.
That's because we have the strictest voter registration laws allowed by federal law.
So why? What do you need to vote? I mean, we hear people asking this question all the time. If I want to go out, and we've had cases where election judges have been misinformed. If I want to vote, what do I need to bring?
In Texas, if you want to vote, you need to bring a photo ID, and it has to be a photo ID that's issued by the Department of Public Transportation, right? So it's a driver's license, a Texas ID, an election ID. You can get an election ID, a concealed carry permit, or there's some federal IDs in a passport, citizenship.
Carry?
Yeah,
Yes,
that counts.
absolutely.
Right. But if you do not have one of those, and you show up to vote, all you have to do is bring your voter registration card and one other piece of identifying information that shows your name and your address.
So like a bill.
A bill. That's right. And then you have to sign an affidavit saying, I don't have an ID. If you just leave it at home, you can't vote. But I don't have an ID, and the reason I don't have an ID is because it's too financially hard for me to get an ID, and they have to let you vote. So when they say, you have to bring your ID, if you have one, you have to bring it. But if you don't have one, you still get to vote.
Mm-hmm. But we've had cases of where election judges. Well-meaning, I'm sure.
No, they're not.
Okay.
I used to be one.
What about
Election judges are
provisional?
partisan.
What about provisional ID?
Provisional ID?
I think so.
Well, there.
I was asking if it was a provision. The vote, would it be a provisional
No,
ballot
it is
or
not.
something?
No, it is not a provisional ballot. It is an actual ballot. But can we talk about provisional ballots?
Sure, I've never heard of them
Because-
before.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
yes, absolutely.
I'm not a government.
So in 2001, Congress passed HAVA, Help America Vote Act. So this was after the debacle in 2000. So basically, whenever you go vote, and let's say you show your ID, and they scan it, and they say, oh, nope, you're not on the voting rolls, you can't vote here. That's not true. You, by federal law, can demand a provisional ballot, and they have to let you cast a provisional ballot. Now, that ballot may or may not count. So if, for whatever reason, you weren't registered to vote, then that provisional ballot's not going to count. But if you were registered, but for whatever reason it didn't make it onto their computer system, that provisional ballot will count. But they have to give you a provisional ballot. Now, election judges, and I used to be one, so I can tell you, unless you're me, they're not probably going to offer you a provisional ballot up front. And that's because that requires a whole lot of additional paperwork that you have to do at the end of the night, which means instead of leaving the polling location as soon as the last voter has voted, you're going to have to stay later before you can actually go deliver your e-slate machines and stuff to them.
Which this year was at 2 a.m. because
Right.
of the state changing the rules.
Right,
at
and
the
I can
last
talk
minute.
about that too because that irritated me when you sent me that article to read.
Oh, I didn't irritate you.
No, you sent me the article irritated me.
It's Gene's fault.
Not your fault, but it's like, it irritated me. So give some background on this.
Oh, I forget. I sent you a lot of things. I don't remember
No,
what it is
on the why they couldn't
Oh,
start
right.
releasing
Okay, so-
election results
so-
till 2 in the morning.
So as you know, and we've talked about here, we've talked about this, is that this election year, starting in
It was the first.
the primaries in March and now in the general election, you didn't have to just go to your your assigned polling location. You could go anywhere in the county and
And vote.
And
Bear County did the same thing, by the way.
And yeah, so it was a great idea to get more people to get out and vote because it takes, and sometimes if you have to drive 2 or 3 hours, I mean, but then we hear, well, we're not going to get the election returns right away because the Secretary of State said we couldn't.
Okay, one
So
has
talk about
nothing
this.
to do with the other.
Okay, so tell us about
Okay,
this.
so the way, ever since Harris County adopted the e-slate machines and
Yes.
since the passage of the HAB Act, so before then, so let's say any election before 2002, right? When you went to your precinct and you voted, and we used paper ballots. I think we used the punch ballots.
Chads, right.
We did. We had the
Chads, right.
hanging Chad ballots. We did, and then those were put in the box. So if you were the election judge, every election judge at the end of the night had to drive that ballot box to the Astrodome, wait in this long line, right, to drive. So you wouldn't get home till like really late in the morning. Once we moved to the e-slate machines, another thing that they did is they said, okay, now instead of having everybody bring their equipment to one central location, we're going to set up all of these annexes. So, for example, in my neighborhood, at the end of the night, I got to take it to the Tracy G Community Center, and that's where I dropped off all my paperwork, dropped off the main machine that keeps tabulations and drop off all my tapes. And then from there, they would take the disc out of all of those machines, right? And then they would submit it to the main county clerk's office through not on the internet, but through like a modem, so it's like just a private number, and they would send them. They've been doing this for years, right? Suddenly, the Secretary of State says, oh, you can't do that anymore. And the reason she said that is because the Republican Party in Harris County filed a complaint. This is based on that Texas Tribune article you sent me. The GOP filed a complaint with the Secretary of State saying that made the vote insecure. The thing is this whole process was put in place when Beverly Kaufman was county clerk. She's a Republican. So it was okay when they were in power, but now that they're not, suddenly it's not good anymore.
One of the difficulties, unfortunately, is every change, it has a ripple effect. And it contributes to the cynicism people have and the feeling that their vote doesn't count. You know, when they put up barriers for the voter ID, that means if people are afraid to come in and vote, they're afraid, especially with all the stuff going on with ICE, that, you know, maybe they'll be asked to show other kind of identification, even if they were born here. Maybe they're family members. So you've got those kind of fears already. And then you feel like, well, you know, it took to 2 in the morning before we even heard our results. So all of that just contributes to this feeling of,
Yeah, but, you know,
we can't trust them.
Not
We can't trust the
hearing your
government.
results till 2 in the morning, that was the norm until 2002.
Well, I was going to say is that, you know, we're
That was the
complaining about,
norm.
have we become too used to immediate?
Yes, we have. And I
Yeah.
do want to correct myself. Most election judges do have the best intentions. The thing is that
But most of them aren't you, though.
no, but what people don't realize is election judges are partisan appointed positions.
Yes.
So election judges are appointed by the majority political party in that precinct. So they're not unbiased. They're not nonpartisan. You know, so some of them do really want to see one side do better than the other. But each precinct's supposed to have a judge and an alternate judge, so you have one of both parties. And so that's supposed to balance it out. You're supposed to have a Republican and a Democrat at every, but the thing is we have such a shortage of election clerks and judges that doesn't always work out. And I would like to give a shout out and tell people to get civically engaged and volunteer to be an election clerk. The average age of election clerks in the United States is 72.
Wow. That's something that people need to do. Speaking of volunteering and things that people need to do, Taya, you signed up for the League of Women Voters Rising Stars program and were accepted. And I had been pushing this, and I know I told you that you should do it. In fact, other people came to me and said, Taya should apply. because they saw what you had done, they saw the work that you had done and the volunteering that you had done with our conversations with the candidates. So, and I know people, other people say very nice things about you and the things that you do, so not to embarrass you, but to compliment you. Tell us a little bit about Taya Young. Who is Taya Young, who's going to be in this Rising Stars program?
Well, first, I am a product of HISD, which I know is going to be a topic coming up. I graduated from Bel Air High School at 2015 at the age of 16 years old. I didn't go to college right away because I was dealing with issues at home and things like that, but I always had it in my mind, I need to go to college. I love learning, so I knew I wanted a higher education. And once I got to college, it just like everything started to click for me. I got involved on campus. I was accepted into the honors program, which was a huge accomplishment for me. It was a giant push to start doing things that I believe in. I'm passionate about learning about the human psyche. I'm a psychology major. I tutor psychology. I love everything about psychology. And I also am an ambassador for a national organization called Active Minds, which is to promote mental health awareness. I bought a chapter of that to UHD.
Hence your T-shirt.
Yes, yes. This is actually, my cousin made this for me. Her name is Kamika Clark, and she's also a therapist. Her Instagram is serenity_counseling_services. So she's been like a motivation to me as well as my aunt. They both are psychology majors. And so basically what I want to do, my goal is to educate other people, to let them know that mental health is important. We get checked up for physical health all the time, but people don't get checked for mental health. And that's a problem because your mental health affects your physical health. Like, you don't have to think about it just as mental illnesses, but think about something as little as stress. Stress suppresses your immune system, which then can lead to other issues. So if you just take a step back and participate in self-care and things like that, you can eliminate bigger problems down the line. And that's little things that I'm passionate about and I want to spread and, let people know. So that's me.
Well, it sounds wonderful. So you're going to be in this leadership program. How long does it last?
It lasts for a whole year. What made me want to apply for the position after you brought it up, I read about it, is it made me, like, the things I read was that we'll be having meetings and it's going to be like a learning opportunity. Like I said, I love to learn. So I took it as this will help me in my goal in the long term. It's going to help me take my goal around Houston, being involved with civic engagement more and things like that. So I'm thinking about, I applied for this position to bring my mental health awareness on a citywide scale and get more involved in my Houston community. Because when I was volunteering with the League of Women Voters, I learned so much. Like just sitting here, all I was doing was timekeeping. That's it. And I just learned so much from meeting these people. And it was new people every time I came. Even the hosts were new. And it made me say, I want to be that person. I want to do what they're doing. I want to be more involved. I want to know what they're talking about because some stuff I didn't know. So it's like, I want to understand what they're talking about more. It's just like an inspiration in this. I see this program as a way to evolve myself. It's for me to get better.
I think that's great. And how much is it costing you?
Nothing.
Right. It's a free program. So that's another thing. It's a good thing. Look, there's all sorts of people who are leaders. Or who want to be leaders, I should say. And a lot of young people coming into college, a lot of people getting out of high school, they want to be leaders. They want, to do things. And that's fantastic. And so this program is there to help guide and direct you. And especially for, it also helps the League of Women Voters because we're training you and getting you to volunteer with things that we're interested in. And part of that is citizenship. It is voter awareness. It is information. One of the things that the League of Women Voters does every year, I'm going to reach over here, I brought in a copy of our voters guide. So we publish this and we ask candidates from all the various elections to sound off on how they stand on the positions. We have other information in here. So, and everybody looks forward to this. And we publish it in several different languages. We do the television shows, the conversations with the candidates. We do this show, Public Affairs, Public Access. We have some new officers in the League of Women Voters. And one of the things that I hear from them is like, they're learning about all the different moving parts, and some of them are fairly new to the organization. Some of them have been involved for a long time. But whenever just because you're involved in an organization doesn't mean you see everything. And so whenever they start to see more and more, they realize, hey, we do a lot. And so this is a great opportunity. I'm glad you're taking advantage of that. And I would like to ask you and invite you to come back on the show from time to time and update us on what you're doing, what you're learning, what you're going through. Would you be willing to do that?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's go back to talking about election issues. So a couple of things that came up, as you said, that are going to be big issues. We learned this week that there's going to be a lot of runoffs, right? I think seven.
Most of the city
most
councils,
of them, right?
yeah.
Most of the city council elections, those 16 seats,
And of course, the mayor.
and the mayor are going to be runoff elections. So that's going to be December the 14th, I believe.
And it's actually not unusual. We almost always have runoffs for city elections because we don't have a primary because it's a nonpartisan election. So you always have more than 2 candidates on the ballot.
Oh, yeah.
And the sad thing, too, is as few people voted this election, there will be fewer people
Right.
voting to make the out decision
Yeah.
as to who is going to be mayor, who's going to sit in the city council, who's going to sit on these other positions.
It'll be about half.
It'll be half.
The voter turnout will be about half.
And I think there were only 15% in Houston that voted. So you're looking at 7%. 7 out of every 100 people who are eligible to vote are going to make that decision.
Which is why every person who's listening today, make sure you put this on your calendar and you vote.
You didn't have to vote the first time to be able to vote in the runoff, by the way.
Okay, so you can say, well, I missed out because...
You can still vote in the runoff.
Okay. So it's not like you had to do one to do the other. It's any
Right.
vote. And are we going to have it again where you can vote anywhere?
Yes, that's going to be the new norm
Yes.
in Harris County. It's going to be that way for the primaries coming up in March too, and for the general election next year.
Which is fantastic.
And it was Harris County, Bexar County, which was San Antonio, and a couple of other counties were doing that
I think
too.
Dallas, somebody said
Dallas
Dallas.
did it a while back.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, so it's. I think most of the urban areas are going to start to try to push to do that. Makes it a lot more convenient, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially for working people.
So really there is no reason not to vote. So we're shaming people now. That's okay.
Well, Texas does make it hard to register. It doesn't as a motor voter, but you have to register to vote 30 days before the election in Texas, which is the maximum amount allowed by federal law. So I think Wyoming or Montana has the highest voter turnout.
So can you still register for this next election? If it's like I'm not registered, can I register now because it's more than 30 days?
If it's more than 30 days, but you have to register before it's 30 days. No, so when's the election? December 14th?
14th.
Yeah, so you could still register for 2 or 3 more days.
Okay, so we need.
Till
If
the
we're gonna,
14th,
if I'm sitting on the fence thinking, should I register?
Do it.
Do it.
You should do it. There's really no excuse to not be registered anyway because it's so easy to register to vote now. Like anytime you go get a driver's license, you can register to vote at the post office, at any government office you can register to vote. And when you get your driver's license, they just ask you, do you want to be registered to vote? And all you have to do is say yes, and they're going to register you to vote. And the thing is, every time you move, you have to re-register to vote.
The other big issue that we learned about in the news, besides the runoffs that we should be aware about, is there's HISD now looks like the TEA is going to come in and remove the board. And there were some new elected positions, some new people who came in. The TEA report, as I read it, it showed that there were more problems than just schools not doing well. Right, that there were problems with the board itself. And so we have a phone call, it looks like. Let's go to that. We just have a minute left.
Hello, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm a registered voter. I just voted in the last election. But one of the things that came up, you mentioned, was the, quote, motor voter. Initially, several years ago that you had to go renew your driver's license and you had to bring your Social Security card, before they would give you your driver's license, even though you were already a registered driver in Texas. And this is when the motor voter law started. And I was sitting in line, and I had my Social Security card or whatever, and the guy in front of me, they said, well, he handed his driver's license in, and I guess his Social Security card. And anyway, said, well, do you want to vote? And he said, yes. Well, he wasn't born in the USA. And when I got up, I said, wait a minute. I said, just because you have a driver's license doesn't mean you're allowed to vote. So I'm kind of curious as to this motor voter deal, whether this is such a bright idea after all.
Okay, thank you. Tina, you want to handle
Well,
that?
I'm not really how did he know the guy wasn't a citizen?
Well, I mean,
Right.
citizens,
So,
that is an issue, but
well, first of all, in Texas, you can't have a driver's license if you're not a citizen or you're not a permanent resident.
it'll say that, right?
And it'll say that, yeah. So, two, if they had gone ahead and registered them to vote, it's actually the tax assessor collector in each county. It's their responsibility to verify that that person actually is eligible to be registered to vote. And so the first time, for whatever reason he had been allowed to register to vote, the first time he had gone to vote, there would have been things he would have had to do to prove that. So there's really the idea that there are non-citizens voting is a myth.
Right. Very rarely does it happen. Very rarely, but it's kind of overblown. But I mean, it should say on the ID card, right?
Right. And the other thing is needing a Social Security card to get your driver's license renewed has nothing to do with motor voter bill.
Okay.
So motor voter bill was passed in the 90s. Texas now requires you to show your Social Security card when you get your driver's license renewed to prove that so they can check to see if you owe back child support.
All right, Christina, that's going to be I have to give you the last word on that. We're running out of time. Thank you so much. I want to thank all my guests, Taya Youngs, William Flores with his new book, and Christina Hughes. Thank you all for being on the show, and thank you for watching. I'm Gene Preuss for the League of Women Voters of the Houston area, and this has been Public Affairs, Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. Thank you for joining us tonight.